Sarah Martinez stared at the job posting on her cracked phone screen at 2:47 a.m. while her 6-year-old daughter Emma slept beside her in their studio apartment. Personal driver for tech billionaire Marcus Kane, $200,000 a year. The catch? Available 24/7, complete discretion required. Previous 3 drivers quit within 2 months. Sarah's bank account showed $47 and rent was due in 3 days. Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible real-life transformation stories, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Sarah had been surviving on 2 hours of sleep for months, juggling 3 part-time jobs while raising Emma alone. Her ex-husband disappeared when Emma was diagnosed with a rare heart condition that required constant monitoring and expensive medications. The medical bills crushed any hope of financial stability, and Sarah found herself choosing between groceries and Emma's prescriptions more often than she cared to admit. The morning of her interview, Sarah borrowed a blazer from her neighbor and took the bus across town to Kane Industries headquarters. The building stretched 47 floors into the Seattle sky, its glass facade reflecting clouds that seemed impossibly distant from Sarah's reality. She'd researched Marcus Kane obsessively the night before, tech prodigy who built his empire from nothing, known for his brilliance and his impossible standards that left assistants in tears and business partners walking away from million-dollar deals. The elevator climbed to the 42nd floor where Sarah met Ms. Chen, Kane's executive assistant, whose sharp eyes seemed to catalog every thread of Sarah's borrowed outfit. "You understand Mr. Kane's requirements are non-negotiable," Ms. Chen said, sliding a thick contract across the mahogany table. Previous drivers couldn't handle the unpredictability. Late-night emergency meetings in different states, sometimes international travel with 4 hours' notice, complete confidentiality regarding his personal life and business dealings. When he turned, Sarah was struck by how young he looked, maybe 35, with dark hair that showed he'd been running his hands through it, and eyes that seemed to process information faster than most people could think. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, but something about his presence filled the enormous office. The one before that couldn't handle driving in silence for 6 hours while I worked. The first one sold information about my dinner conversations to a gossip blogger. He moved to his desk, leaning against it casually. "What makes you different?" "You start Monday. Ms. Chen will give you the details." He slid into the back seat of the black BMW without acknowledging her presence, immediately opening his laptop and diving into work. His voice remained calm, but his free hand clenched and unclenched as numbers in the millions were discussed like grocery lists. She used the time to research his schedule, finding mentions of a potential merger with a Japanese tech company. When Kane returned that evening, his expression was darker, his jaw tight with frustration. Kane's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, surprised. "You're the first driver who's asked." She'd assumed Kane wouldn't know or care about her personal life. "Emma, she's 6. Kane listened without interrupting, occasionally asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention. The guilt of leaving her daughter ate at Sarah as she drove Kane to the airport the next morning, but the overtime pay would cover Emma's next specialist appointment. Sarah watched him negotiate a deal worth $200 million while eating gas station sandwiches in the car. His laptop balanced on his knees as rain hammered the windshield. He was methodical, patient, brilliant in ways that made Sarah understand how he'd built his empire. But she also noticed how he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was looking, how he rarely ate real meals, how his phone buzzed constantly with calls he ignored. Kane looked up from his screen. "Are you mothering me, Sarah?" "There's a good restaurant at the next exit," he said quietly. They talked about Emma's drawings, Kane's early days building his company in a garage, the strange isolation that came with success Sarah couldn't imagine, and poverty Kane couldn't remember. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Emma needs surgery next year. Her heart condition is getting worse. The insurance will cover most of it, but not everything. Not the best surgeon, not the private room so she won't be scared, not the time I'll need to take off work to care for her afterward." Her voice stayed steady, but her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I need to save $200,000 in the next 8 months, or I need to watch my daughter get second-best care because I couldn't do better for her." He was staring out the window, his expression completely closed off. Kane began sharing more details about his meetings, asking Sarah's opinion on routes and timing. He remembered things about Emma, her favorite colors, her upcoming school play, the fact that she'd never been to the ocean despite living in Seattle her entire life. 3 weeks into the job, Kane handed Sarah an envelope as she dropped him off at his building. "Kane, I can't..." Kane's jaw tightened as he stared at the returned money. "Pride is a luxury you can't afford, Sarah." That afternoon, while Kane was in meetings, Sarah called the pharmacy to ask about payment plans for Emma's next prescription. The pharmacist's voice was apologetic but firm. They couldn't extend more credit, and without payment, Emma's medication wouldn't be available for pickup. Sarah sat in the BMW outside Kane's meeting location, fighting back tears as she calculated and recalculated numbers that wouldn't add up no matter how creatively she approached them. Emma's next specialist appointment was in 2 days, and without her medication, the appointment would be pointless. Kane emerged from the building 3 hours later, his expression grim as he slid into the back seat. "Apparently, my leadership style is too uncompromising for their vision of the company's future. I built this company from nothing, and they're going to hand it over to some Harvard MBA who's never written a line of code in his life." Kane leaned back against the leather seat, suddenly looking exhausted. 15 years of my life, and it comes down to politics and profit margins. "Emma missed school again today," Sarah found herself saying. "Her breathing was bad this morning, and I couldn't leave her with the babysitter. She loves learning, but she's already behind because of all the appointments and sick days. Sometimes I wonder if I'm failing her in ways I can't even see. That's love." "Kane..." She turned to face Kane directly instead of speaking to his reflection. "Because you remind me that there are still people in the world who work for something other than themselves. Because your daughter deserves a mother who doesn't have to choose between pride and prescriptions. And because..." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Because I've spent 15 years building something I thought mattered. And in one afternoon, I watched it get reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. But what you're building with Emma, that can't be taken away by a board vote." Kane moved to the front seat without asking, handing her tissues from the glove compartment and sitting in comfortable silence while she cried out months of fear and exhaustion and desperate love. When Sarah finally composed herself, Kane was looking out at the parking lot, giving her privacy and her vulnerability. It felt almost normal, like they were friends carpooling home from work instead of employer and employee navigating the careful boundaries of their professional relationship. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he said. "Depending on how it goes, you might be looking for a new job soon. What will you do if they vote you out?" "I don't know," he admitted. "This company has been my entire adult life. I'm not sure who I am without it. Someone who solves problems other people think are impossible. The company is just one thing you built. It's not who you are." Sarah carried her daughter to their shared bed, brushing hair away from Emma's face as she settled her under the covers. Emma's breathing was even and strong. The medication was working, buying them time Sarah was desperately grateful for. The next morning, Kane was quieter than usual, his laptop closed for once as Sarah drove him to the office. He stared out the window at the city waking up around them, occasionally checking his phone for messages that seemed to only increase his tension. Sarah asked. Sarah listened, asking questions when she didn't understand something, offering suggestions when she saw gaps in his reasoning. "They already know what you've accomplished. What they want to know is what you're going to accomplish next." She told herself it was just concern for her job security, but she knew it was more than that. Somewhere in the past month, Marcus Kane had stopped being just her employer and started being someone she cared about. Terminal B. Kane was waiting at the curb when Sarah arrived, but something was different about his posture. He looked lighter somehow, more relaxed than she'd seen him since they'd met. "They voted to keep me as CEO, unanimously. Instead of justifying what I'd already built, I showed them what we could build together." "Now the airport," he said, settling back with a satisfied expression. "Marcus, what did you do?" "No commitment, no pressure, just a conversation." The specialist she'd been trying to get an appointment with for months, the surgeon whose waiting list was longer than Emma's life expectancy without intervention, was willing to meet with Emma because Marcus Kane had asked her to. "I'm doing it because I want to. Because Emma deserves every opportunity, and because you deserve to stop carrying this alone." An hour later, Emma arrived at the airport with an overnight bag and eyes wide with wonder at the sight of the private jet. "Mama says I'm really good at it." Emma's gasp of delight filled the small cabin. "Is this really for me?" Kane sat across the aisle, working on his laptop, but glancing up frequently to answer Emma's excited questions about flying and clouds and how small the cars looked from up high. Kane closed his laptop and looked at Sarah directly. Because 6 months ago, I had everything I thought I wanted: money, power, success, respect. But I was miserable. I was so focused on building my empire that I forgot to build a life. Then you showed up, working 3 jobs and raising a daughter and never complaining, never giving up, and I realized I'd been measuring success all wrong. Watching you love Emma so completely, so selflessly, it reminded me what actually matters. Not board meetings or stock prices or quarterly projections. People matter. Love matters. Family matters. Both of you have. This isn't charity or pity or some grand gesture to make myself feel better. This is me trying to say thank you for showing me who I want to be. The man who'd seemed so cold and distant a month ago was looking at her with an expression that made her believe in possibilities she'd stopped letting herself consider. She was younger than Sarah had expected, with kind eyes and a warm smile that immediately put Emma at ease. Over fish tacos and French fries, Dr. Hernandez talked to Emma about her drawings, her favorite subjects in school, her dreams of becoming an artist or maybe a doctor or possibly a pilot who draws pictures in the sky. Sarah watched her daughter charming one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country with stories about the magical creatures that lived in their apartment walls, and felt something shift in her chest. Hope. Real hope. For the first time in months. Hernandez said as they finished eating, "Would you like to walk on the beach while I talk to your mama?" Sarah watched them go. Her daughter and the billionaire who'd somehow become so much more than her employee, building sandcastles as the sun set over water Emma had never seen before. Marcus filled me in on her medical history. I'd like to schedule a full consultation next month, but based on what I know so far, I'm optimistic about her prognosis. He can be very persuasive when he's advocating for someone he cares about. He looked happier than she'd ever seen him, more relaxed and genuine than the intense businessman she'd first met. Sarah tucked her daughter into the king-sized bed, marveling at how small Emma looked in the luxurious surroundings. She had the best day of her life, Sarah said, settling into the chair beside him. Sarah had never experienced this kind of peace. No immediate crisis to manage, no bills to worry about, no desperate calculations about how to make it through another week. For the first time in years, she could simply exist in a moment, without fear. Kane turned to look at her, his expression serious. "That depends on what you want to happen. I'm in love with your honesty and your refusal to give up in the way you made me remember what it feels like to care about something more important than quarterly profits. I know I'm your employer, and you might feel like you can't say no, but I need you to know that your job isn't contingent on how you feel about me. Whether you want to explore this or not, you'll always have a place in my company. Emma will get the best medical care available, and I'll respect whatever boundaries you need." The man she'd started caring for, despite all her efforts to keep things professional, was telling her he loved her, offering her security and stability and hope for Emma's future, asking for nothing in return except honesty about her feelings. "I love you too," Sarah whispered, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I tried not to, because it seemed impossible and dangerous and like something that would only lead to heartbreak. But somewhere between Vancouver and tonight, you stopped being my employer and started being someone I couldn't imagine living without." Hernandez leading the surgical team and the best possible prognosis for a full recovery. Kane insisted on covering all the medical expenses, not as Sarah's employer, but as someone who loved Emma like his own daughter. Sarah continued working as Kane's driver, but their relationship evolved into something neither of them had expected when she first answered that late-night job posting. Kane began spending evenings at Sarah and Emma's apartment, helping with homework and listening to Emma's elaborate bedtime stories. Sarah started attending Kane's business dinners and charity events, not as an employee, but as his partner. Emma flourished with the stability and attention, her drawings becoming more elaborate and confident as her health improved and her world expanded. She started calling Kane Marcus instead of Mr. Kane, then eventually almost Daddy when she thought no one was listening. 6 months after that first trip to San Diego, Kane proposed on the same beach where Emma had first seen the ocean. It wasn't a grand gesture or an elaborate production, just the 3 of them watching the sunset. Kane getting down on one knee in the sand while Emma clapped and declared it the most romantic thing she'd ever seen. Sarah said yes through tears of joy, finally allowing herself to believe in the kind of happiness she'd thought was reserved for other people's lives. Hernandez repaired the defect completely, and Emma's recovery was swift and uncomplicated. Kane rarely left the hospital during Emma's stay, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and reading her stories when she was too groggy from medication to sleep. The morning Emma was discharged, she presented Kane with a drawing she'd been working on throughout her recovery. A picture of their family standing on the beach, with hearts floating above their heads and the words, "My almost daddy fixed my heart too," written in her careful 6-year-old handwriting. Hernandez as one of the witnesses and Emma as the flower girl. Emma's dress matched Sarah's, and she took her job as flower girl very seriously, making sure every petal was perfectly placed for her mama's big day. Kane's wedding gift to Sarah was a foundation in Emma's name, dedicated to providing medical care and support for children with cardiac conditions whose families couldn't afford the best treatment. Sarah's gift to Kane was a framed copy of Emma's drawing and a promise to help him remember every day that success wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the love they built together. As they danced on the beach while Emma spun in circles around them, Sarah marveled at how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been a single mother working 3 jobs and choosing between groceries and medications. Now she was married to a man who loved her daughter as his own, with a healthy child and a future full of possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. The driven, isolated businessman who'd hired Sarah as his driver had become a man who left work early to attend Emma's school plays, who spent weekends building blanket forts and teaching Emma to code, who measured his success not by his company's stock price, but by the sound of his family's laughter echoing through their new home. Kane's employees grew accustomed to seeing Emma's drawings taped to his office walls, and to their CEO leaving meetings early because his daughter had a science fair or a dance recital. The job posting that had seemed like such a desperate last resort became the beginning of everything Sarah and Emma had needed but never dared to hope for. Not just financial security, but love, family, and a future where Emma's dreams were limited only by her imagination, not by her mother's bank account. The stress of defending his company while learning to be a husband and father pushed Kane to his limits, and Sarah watched him struggle to balance the ruthless businessman he needed to be in boardrooms with the gentle man he wanted to be at home. Emma, now 7 and thriving after her surgery, became an unexpected source of wisdom during the crisis. One evening, as Kane sat at their kitchen table surrounded by legal documents and financial projections, Emma climbed onto his lap with her latest drawing. Kane asked, grateful for the distraction from hostile acquisition terms and proxy battles. Emma had drawn hearts floating above their heads and a rainbow in the background, because as she'd explained to Sarah before, every good story needs hope. That's what Mama always tells me when I get scared about my heart. Love makes everything better. Whatever happened with the company, he would still have this kitchen table covered in crayons and homework, this little girl who saw corporate raiders as dragons to be defeated, this woman who'd shown him that success meant more than stock prices and market dominance. The next morning, Kane approached the crisis differently. Instead of fighting the takeover with traditional defensive strategies, he went on the offensive, launching a campaign that highlighted Kane Industries' innovation and employee loyalty. He invited news crews to tour their offices, showcasing the company culture he'd built and the technologies they were developing. Sarah suggested he bring Emma to the office for Bring Your Daughter to Work Day, and the photo of Kane and Emma working side by side at his computer went viral, humanizing the tech mogul in ways no PR firm could have engineered. The takeover attempt ultimately failed, but not because of financial maneuvering or legal strategies. It failed because Kane's employees, investors, and partners saw what Sarah and Emma had shown him, that his real strength came from his ability to inspire loyalty and build genuine relationships, not just generate profits. The news came as a shock to both of them, as they'd been so focused on helping Emma adjust to their new family dynamic that they hadn't actively planned for another child. Sarah's first emotion was fear, not about Kane's reaction, but about whether she could handle another child while managing Emma's ongoing medical needs and Kane's demanding career. When she told him, sitting in their car outside Emma's school while waiting for pickup, he went completely still for a moment before breaking into the biggest smile she'd ever seen from him. "Are you okay with this? I know we didn't plan." She drew elaborate pictures of their expanded family, always placing herself protectively next to the baby and declaring herself the best big sister in the whole world. Sarah experienced complications that required bed rest during her final trimester, forcing her to temporarily step back from driving Kane to work. For the first time since they'd met, Kane had to navigate his daily schedule without Sarah's steady presence, and he discovered how much he'd come to depend on their morning conversations and her practical wisdom about everything from route planning to conflict resolution. Kane hired a temporary driver, but it wasn't the same. Marcus Rodriguez was efficient and professional, but he didn't ask about Emma's school projects or offer insights about business negotiations. He didn't know that Kane needed exactly 7 minutes of silence before important meetings to organize his thoughts, or that he worked best when classical music played softly in the background during long drives. "I miss you," Kane told Sarah one evening as he sat on the edge of their bed, helping her sort through Emma's outgrown clothes for the baby. "Not just in the car. I miss having you there when things get complicated. You know I'm not going anywhere, right? Even when the baby comes, even when things change, we're still a team." Emma was fascinated by her new brother, insisting on helping with every diaper change and feeding, declaring him the most beautiful baby ever created. Kane, who could manage complex business negotiations without breaking a sweat, found himself panicked by a crying baby who couldn't tell him what was wrong. Sarah, exhausted from sleepless nights and recovering from childbirth, sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands of caring for a newborn while ensuring Emma didn't feel forgotten. Kane became expert at 3 a.m. feedings, walking the hardwood floors of their home while David slept against his chest. Sarah watched Kane discover a patience and gentleness she'd never seen before, marveling at how naturally he took to fatherhood despite his initial fears about not knowing how to be a dad. Emma proved to be an exceptional big sister, entertaining David with elaborate puppet shows and singing him the same lullabies Sarah had sung to her during her hospital stays. She seemed to understand instinctively when Sarah needed help, or when Kane was struggling with work stress, offering hugs and crayon drawings that somehow made everything feel more manageable. When David was 6 months old, Sarah returned to work part-time, bringing the baby with her in a car seat that Kane had installed with engineering precision. David seemed to enjoy the movement of the car, often falling asleep to the gentle vibration of the engine and the sound of his parents' conversation in the front seat. He instituted family-friendly policies throughout Kane Industries, offering on-site childcare, flexible schedules for working parents, and generous parental leave. His employees noticed the difference. Kane was still demanding and ambitious, but he'd become more understanding of the challenges his staff faced in balancing work and family responsibilities. One afternoon, while David napped in his carrier and Sarah waited in the car during one of Kane's meetings, she received a call that would change everything again. Dr. Hernandez was on the line, her voice serious in a way that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Sarah, I need you to bring Emma in for some follow-up tests. We've been monitoring her progress since the surgery, and there are some irregularities in her latest scans that I want to investigate." Emma had been doing so well, running and playing and living like a normal child. The possibility that something might be wrong felt like a cruel twist of fate after everything they'd overcome. Hernandez's call threw broken sobs. Kane immediately canceled his remaining meetings and drove them straight to Emma's school to pick her up early. She asked quietly as they drove to the medical center, "Remember how she likes to check on you to make sure you're staying healthy?" The tests took several hours, during which Kane paced the waiting room while holding David and Sarah sat with Emma, reading her favorite books and playing quiet games to keep her distracted. When Dr. Hernandez finally emerged from the examination room, her expression was carefully neutral. "The good news is that Emma's surgery repair is holding perfectly," she began, and Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "However, we've discovered some scar tissue that's developed around the surgical site. It's not immediately dangerous, but it could become problematic as Emma grows if we don't address it. We can remove the scar tissue arthroscopically, which means smaller incisions, shorter recovery time, and minimal risk. It's actually a fairly routine procedure for patients who've had the type of repair Emma had." "Will I have to stay in the hospital again?" Emma was older and understood more about what was happening, which helped with her anxiety, but also meant she had more sophisticated fears about the procedure. His executives were stunned. Marcus Kane had never taken time off for anything, had once conducted a board meeting from the hospital when he'd broken his leg in a skiing accident. But Emma wasn't a broken leg, and Kane had learned that some things were more important than quarterly earning. The night before Emma's surgery, she presented Sarah and Kane with a drawing she'd been working on in secret. It showed the three of them standing together in a hospital room, with David as a tiny figure in Sarah's arms and hearts floating above all their heads. But this drawing was different from her earlier ones, more detailed, more sophisticated, with careful attention to facial expressions and body language that showed how much her artistic skills had developed. That's because we know everything is going to be okay. And look, I drew David too, because he's part of our family now and families stick together no matter what. This is beautiful, Emma. You're getting really good at showing feelings in your pictures. But the experience had changed something in Kane. Sitting in that hospital waiting room, holding his infant son while his wife comforted his stepdaughter, Kane had realized that his definition of success had completely transformed. The merger deals and market expansions that once consumed his thoughts now seemed secondary to the more important work of being present for his family. Kane began delegating more responsibilities to his capable team, trusting others to handle the day-to-day operations that he'd once insisted on managing personally. He started leaving the office at reasonable hours, prioritizing family dinners and bedtime stories over late-night strategy sessions. His employees initially worried that Kane was losing his edge, but productivity actually increased as his team stepped up to fill the leadership void, and Kane's improved work-life balance made him more focused and effective during the hours he was in the office. Emma's artistic talents continued to flourish, and Kane enrolled her in advanced art classes at a prestigious academy across town. Every Saturday morning, he would drive Emma to her art lessons while Sarah stayed home with David, and these car rides became precious one-on-one time for Kane and his stepdaughter. During these drives, Emma would tell Kane about her latest projects and her dreams of becoming a famous artist who painted pictures that made people happy. Kane would share stories about his own childhood dreams and the importance of pursuing passions alongside practical skills. "Do you think I could be an artist and a doctor like Dr. Hernandez?" Emma asked one Saturday as they drove through the city. "Who says you have to choose just one thing? Never let anyone else decide what you're capable of. Some of the most successful people I know are good at many different things. Your mama is a brilliant driver and an amazing mother, and she's also one of the smartest business advisors I've ever worked with, even though that's not her official job." Sarah often joked that Emma had Kane wrapped around her little finger, but she could see how much these moments meant to both of them. They held it in the backyard of their new house, a sprawling property with room for David to crawl and explore, space for Emma's art supplies and projects, and a home office where Kane could work when needed without feeling disconnected from his family. Emma had insisted on making David's birthday cake herself, with help from Sarah and a great deal of flour scattered across the kitchen floor. The result was lopsided and covered in fingerprints, but David clapped and laughed when they brought it out, smearing frosting across his face with delighted enthusiasm. Kane's parents flew in from New York for the celebration, still adjusting to their son's transformation from workaholic bachelor to devoted family man. They'd been skeptical about Kane's quick marriage to his former driver, but Emma's charm and Sarah's genuine warmth had won them over completely. "I've never seen Marcus so happy," Kane's mother confided to Sarah as they watched Kane chase Emma around the yard while carrying David. "For years, I worried that he would work himself to death without ever really living. You and the children have given him something I could never give him: peace." Kane's company went public, making him one of the youngest billionaires in tech history. But the achievement felt less significant than David's first steps, or Emma's first art show at school. Sarah watched Kane navigate the pressures of being a public figure, while maintaining his commitment to being present for his family, proud of how he'd learned to set boundaries between his professional and personal life. Emma, now 9, had become something of a local celebrity in their neighborhood. Her art teacher had submitted several of her pieces to a regional children's art competition, and Emma had won first place in her age category with a painting titled "My Family's Hearts." The painting showed 4 hearts: Sarah's yellow and warm like sunshine, Kane's blue and strong like the ocean, David's green and growing like a seedling, and Emma's own heart red and bright with tiny golden threads connecting it to all the others. When asked by a local newspaper reporter what inspired the painting, Emma had said simply, "Sometimes hearts get broken, but love fixes them and makes them stronger. My family taught me that." Kane was initially uncomfortable with the attention, but Sarah helped him see that their story might inspire other families facing medical challenges or financial struggles. Hernandez's research foundation, and established a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing education while caring for children with medical needs. Sarah took on a more active role in these charitable efforts, discovering a passion for advocacy and nonprofit management that surprised them both. "You should consider going back to school," Kane suggested one evening as they reviewed grant applications for their scholarship fund. "You have incredible instincts for this work, and there are programs that would help you develop the technical skills to go with your natural abilities." "I don't know if I have time, with David still so young and Emma's activities and everything you need." "You shouldn't have to put your dreams on hold because you're taking care of everyone else." Sarah began researching nonprofit management programs, talking to admissions counselors and other working mothers who had returned to school. Emma was enthusiastic about the idea, declaring that she wanted to help people too when she grew up, maybe by painting pictures for hospital rooms so sick kids wouldn't be scared. Kane surprised Sarah for their second wedding anniversary by presenting her with an acceptance letter to a prestigious nonprofit management program that would allow her to complete her degree through a combination of online coursework and weekend residencies. He'd submitted her application after she'd mentioned the program, but convinced herself she wasn't qualified for it. "They accepted you because you're brilliant and experienced and exactly the kind of person they want in their program. Going to school while managing a family will be challenging, but it won't be harder than what you've already overcome." Emma loved helping with Sarah's homework, particularly the creative projects that required visual presentations. David, now a curious toddler, seemed to absorb the atmosphere of learning and achievement that permeated their household. Kane discovered that he enjoyed being more involved in the daily logistics of family life, taking on school pickup duties and managing bedtime routines when Sarah had evening classes. There were nights when Sarah fell asleep over her textbooks at the kitchen table. Mornings when Kane had to handle David's tantrum while Sarah rushed to finish an assignment. And moments when Emma felt overlooked because both parents were juggling competing demands. But they learned to communicate more directly about their needs and to ask for help when they needed it. She painted pictures of families in hospital waiting rooms, children playing despite physical limitations, and communities coming together to support those in need. Her art teacher suggested that Emma might benefit from working with a more advanced instructor, someone who could help her develop the technical skills to match her natural empathy and observational abilities. Kane found a renowned children's art instructor who agreed to work with Emma privately, and these lessons became another highlight of Emma's week. Professor Martinez was a retired museum curator who specialized in nurturing young talent, and she immediately recognized Emma's potential. "Your daughter has something special," Professor Martinez told Kane and Sarah after Emma's first lesson. "It's not just technical ability, though that can be developed. It's her way of seeing emotion and translating it into visual form. She captures the essence of her subjects in ways that many adult artists struggle to achieve." She began entering more competitions and exhibitions, winning recognition that brought both pride and pressure. The pressure became evident when Emma started worrying excessively about her next piece, erasing and redrawing the same sketch multiple times instead of working with her usual confident flow. Sarah and Kane realized they needed to help Emma understand that artistic growth came from experimentation and risk-taking, not from perfectionism. "You fell down a lot, but you didn't give up because falling was part of learning. Art is the same way. Some paintings will work exactly like you want them to, and some won't. But both kinds teach you something important." Kane learned to apply the patience he showed Emma to his business dealings, finding that employees responded better to guidance than criticism. Sarah discovered that the problem-solving skills she'd developed as a single mother translated perfectly to nonprofit management, where resources were always limited and creative solutions were essential. David, meanwhile, was developing into a confident, curious toddler who seemed to inherit the best qualities from all his family members. He had Sarah's determination, Kane's analytical mind, and Emma's artistic eye for detail. At 18 months, he could stack blocks with engineering precision, but he would also pause to admire the way sunlight fell across his toys, pointing and babbling as if trying to describe something beautiful he couldn't yet put into words. Years later, when Emma was grown and pursuing her own dreams as a pediatric cardiac surgeon inspired by Dr. Hernandez, Sarah would look back on that night when she'd applied for a job nobody wanted and realize it had been the best decision of her life. Not because it led to wealth or security, but because it led to love. The kind of love that transforms lives and builds futures, and proves that sometimes the most desperate moments can become doorways to the most beautiful possibilities. And sometimes, when Kane thought no one was looking, Sarah would catch him staring at Emma's childhood drawing that still hung in his office, smiling at the reminder that the best things he'd ever built weren't companies or deals or empires, but the family that had changed his life in ways no amount of money could measure. The single mother who'd taken a job nobody wanted had indeed lived the best days of her life. Not because she'd married a billionaire, but because she'd found someone who saw her strength, valued her love, and helped her build a life where her children could grow up healthy and happy and loved beyond measure. It had been about two lonely people finding each other, and a little girl finding the father she'd always needed, and all of them discovering that the best kind of wealth wasn't what you accumulated, but what you shared with the people who mattered most.